Hey folks, today we're covering Developer Diary 5 for Europa Universalis 5, and this is going to be on religions and cultures. It's also going to talk about languages as well, and this is like a second part almost to the very first Developer Diary we had 4 or 5 weeks ago that covered the population system. So if you did miss my video on that, do go back and watch it either before or after this one, because then you'll get like the basis on how the population system works. But this is all about like the second layer of that system, religion, culture, and language. And as they say here, every population in your nation carries with them an identity that's shaped by their traits. Their religion guides their values, needs, and aspirations. Their culture and language defines their sense of belonging, their traditions, their influence, and their names. Together, these elements bring a living tapestry to your nation, influencing not only the lives of your people, but also the kind of advances, buildings, and bonuses you will get whilst you play EU5, because each one of these areas, religion, culture, and language, give different modifiers, different bonuses. There's even some advances that are locked behind some of these as well. So there's all these different ways this is going to play out for you, depending on what happens. Yes, most campaigns are going to play as just the same religion every time, but maybe you'll switch over, maybe some kind of reformation will happen, and then you'll play as this different religion, and then you'll almost get a different playthrough. Not a massive change, but some of them are quite drastic. So you can have all these different ways you've got to play the game and different needs, so it's going to affect how you kind of interact with all the other systems as well. As we've seen through all these dev diaries, everything kind of intertwined together. So if one thing changes, it changes a lot of other things as well in how you play the game, different requirements, different trade goods you might need, and all these different things as well. But let's get into the main part of the dev diary. So the first bit they're going to talk about is religion. Religion has been a driving force in history. In EU5, it plays a deeper role in shaping your nation's identity and trajectory. The game represents nearly 300 distinct religions, making the spiritual diversity of the early modern world even more represented than any previous EU title. And from what we've seen, it's definitely a step up from EU4, and it's probably the most in-depth religion system than we have seen in any Paradox game. I guess Crusader Kings has quite a lot of religion stuff in it, but as you'll see through this dev diary and the previous Tinto talks, Tinto flavors that we've had, there's a lot of content at launch around all these different religions, or most of them, I guess. Some of them are a little bit more generic. A lot of them, though, do have that unique content they were talking about earlier on already. While the majority of these faiths are already present at the game's start, some of them will also dynamically appear over time. Movements such as Sikhism in South Asia or Lutheranism during the Protestant Reformation will rise and spread as your campaign unfolds, shaping societies and sparking new conflicts. And you can see here, this is the first map they're going to show us. This is the religion map mode in 1337. For the majority of the world. You've not got America on there, but you've got the majority of the world where most of you are probably going to start playing when you do get your hands on the game. So you can see here how it is at the start. Catholicism, Orthodox, Tengrist, Hindu, all these different religions. And then in the next map they're going to show us, this is a campaign they did, and in the 1600s, this is how the map looks. So you can see that Reformation going on in Europe. You can see different religions are spread around quite a bit. And obviously every time you play this game, it is going to play out differently. It's so dynamic. All these different events that can happen, different nations, switching religions, all these different ways your campaign can play out differently. And as you can see, this is one example of that. So these religions are structured into broader religious groups, for example, and you can see a list here. Christianity encompasses traditions such as Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Islam includes Sunni, Shiism, and Ibadi branches. The Dharma group covers South Asian traditions such as Hinduism and Jainism. The African folk religious group covers indigenous beliefs throughout Africa such as Bantu and Bori. And then the Buddhist religion group covers Far East religions such as Shintoism and Eastern Buddhism and a bunch of other ones as well. I'm not going to try butcher the names of the other ones. These are just some of the religions that are present in EU5. This layered approach allowed them to reflect both the shared heritage of religious groups and the unique differences between different denominations of the same group. So obviously like Catholicism and Protestantism, they are shared under, Christianity, but they have very different interactions with each other and things like that, and that is shown in the game. And then they're going to show us here the tooltip for Buddhism, the religion group, and then as they just said, this will show you all the religions that fall under this religious group. Within some faiths, there exist distinct branches that are represented in-game through multinational religious organizations. These institutions transcend political borders, linking together nations that share allegiance through a particular religion. Two nations that are very different, but maybe they follow the same religion. So you will have some modifiers that make you get along that little bit better. Each of these organizations has a recognized leader, and that leader wields significant influence. By issuing religious laws, they can shape not only the internal affairs of their own nation, but also the policies and practices of every nation that belongs to that branch. The most prominent religious organization is the Catholic Church, ruled by the Pope and his seat in Rome, but other international religious organizations exist in EU5, with some forming as the game progresses. As I said, everything isn't static. there is some religions that kind of pop up and they're going to use this system as well. For example, the Patriarchate of Moscow represents a specific branch of the Orthodox Church. Nations aligned with this branch are bound by spiritual leadership, and the Patriarch's decision ripple outwards, influencing the faith and governance of multiple countries at once. So this is how it works with all the other religions as well that have similar systems. In this example, they could change a religious law, and that affects all the realms that follow this version of that religion as well. So again, all these different ways all the systems work together. So each religion in EU5 has its unique bonuses, limitations, interactions, and customization available to players as they play. A Sunni Islamic nation has a bonus to trade efficiency. The export and import of alcohol is banned, obviously due to their religion. Access to religious figures can give nationwide bonuses, and also these nations have access to the Sunni schools of jurisprudence. A Christian Catholic nation will get a big bonus to clergy literacy, a ban on becoming an empire, because obviously the Pope is the only emperor. There's no other emperors. Well, yes, there's a Holy Roman Emperor, but there can't be any other emperors outside of that. Access to Catholic Church interactions, such as the papal bulls, and the ability to canonize saints using religious influence. That was covered in an earlier dev diary. While a Buddhist nation will have bonuses to nationwide literacy, access to the honor and purity system, and the ability to join a sect within Shintoism. And again, all of these different ones, so Catholicism, Sunni religions, and Buddhist, these were all covered in previous dev diaries with a little bit more information. So if you go back on my channel, you'll be able to find breakdowns of all of these, how they're going to work, all the different mechanics. This, as always, with the developer diaries, is more of a general overview. And they're going to show here the society tab. We've seen this quite a bit. And you can see the religion, primary religion is Shinto, and then you also get the language that this religion kind of uses for its day-to-day working. And then below that, you can see a bunch of information: religious unity, conversion rate, holy sites, primary religion tolerance, tolerance of heretics, tolerance of heathens, and they're going to talk about that later on, so we don't need to cover it too much here. And then below that, you can see the international organization, the religion modifiers, honor and purity. Again, they covered that in a previous dev diary. And then the actions you could take. So cleansing ritual, you could go on a pilgrimage, religious offerings, and then the last one, commit seppuku. And these are different for each religion. So you'll have these different religious actions you can take part in, and they will give you bonuses, or maybe they affect something else in your campaigns. So it's really a decision if you want to do these or not. And then below that, you can see the holy sites as well that this religion has. In EU5, locations do not represent a single religion. It is lived and practiced by the populations that make up that location, so very different to previous EU games. This creates a more dynamic and realistic religious landscape. A bustling Mediterranean metropolis, for example, might include Jewish, Orthodox, Lutheran, Sunni, and Catholic populations, all living side by side. Rather than the monolithic faith, your cities and towns become a mosaic of belief, reflecting the historical pluralism of the early modern world. Obviously, you can take actions to change that, you can convert people, but as they say here, especially in certain areas of the world, you're going to have all these different religions, and then how you interact with them may affect like how well your country does, because you might have a sizable population of a different religion. You could try and get rid of them, but maybe you could use those population for something good in your realm. You might want to actually keep them around. And you can see an example of this. This is Valencia in 1337, so at game start. So Catholicism is 74%, Sunnism is 21%, and Judaism is almost 4%. So again, how you interact with this can affect how your campaigns play out, because if they're unhappy, they're not going to be productive for you, or maybe they won't actually be able to be used by you. So again, all these different decisions you're going to have to take. As your empire expands through conquest or colonization, your religious demographics will naturally become more diverse. Managing this diversity becomes an active challenge for the player as they play through their campaigns. Balancing tolerance and conversion is also a key part of governing efficiently. This is where the tolerance mechanic comes into play. If you've played EU4, and I'm sure many of you have, this concept may sound familiar, but in EU5 it has been expanded and tied directly into the population system. As with everything we've seen for this game, they've kind of reworked most mechanics from EU4, made them that little bit more interesting, and integrate them into other systems as well. So tolerance represents how respectively and fairly a society treats followers of a different faith. Every nation tracks tolerance in these three categories. So primary religion, the primary religion you follow, heretics, groups that share the same religion group but follow different denominations, like Catholics versus Protestants, and then heathens, groups together entirely different religious groups, so Christianity versus Islam versus Buddhism, all these different religion groups, and they're the three levels that you can have. High tolerance brings tangible benefits. Population of tolerated faiths will enjoy greater pop satisfaction, reducing these populations joining rebellions, and also contributing to your control and institution spread in locations throughout your realm. Diplomatically, tolerance also improves relations with nations that share the same faith, strengthening your international position with people of the same faith as you. And then next they're going to show us some examples of this. So the first one here is the primary religion tolerance of the two Sicilies, and you can see the different modifiers here. So the base value, they have the spiritualist societal value, they have embellished the great works of faith, and they also have the same religion policy active as well. So that is improving it. In the next example, tolerance of heretics in the two Sicilies, and that is just minus 2.5. And then tolerance of heathens, -5. So they really don't like heathens here. They don't really like heretics either. And they really like people in countries that share the same religion that they have. However, in EU5, embracing broad tolerance is not always the universal strategy that you can use in the game. Many nations will find it easy to focus loyalty and stability around their primary religion, leaving heretics and heathens at a disadvantage, as we just saw with the two Sicilies. In these cases, conversion becomes a powerful tool to reshape your demographics, unify your population, and assert the religious character of your realm. So as they're saying here, there's kind of 3 ways you can play this. One, you can have tolerance for a bunch of people, just let everyone kind of be in your nation, happy good times. You can have the middle way, I guess, where you kind of go both ways. You kind of tolerate people, but you also convert people as well. Or you can go like full in your religion and try convert people and really shun all the other religions if you do decide to go that way. There's going to be events and things like that, different situations that might push you in that direction as well. So how does conversion work in EU5? In EU5, religious conversion is a slow process that takes time depending on a multitude of factors, varying from location to location, and they're going to list a few of them here. So advances in technology, they can provide you bonuses. Estate privileges, the average literacy of clerics in a location, control of that location, different buildings, different government and religious organization laws, and then humanist versus spiritualist in the societal system, and that is covered later on in this dev diary, so we don't need to cover that too much at the moment. You are also able to use a cabinet action to focus on a specific province in your realm and kind of push this along as well. You can see a tooltip here for the conversion speed. So they've got madrasas, convert province, so somebody's trying to do this in their realm specifically. The base value for every country, so how this will happen just naturally if you don't do anything, and then all the different modifiers below that as well. So if you're focusing on conversion, trying to get everyone into the same religion, you're going to have to change some of your laws, change some of your societal values and different areas of the game to try speed that up as well. Or if you're not too bothered, obviously you can focus on something else instead, but it does depend how you're playing through your campaigns. In EU5, your primary religion is not locked. At any point in your campaign, you as the player have the agency to change your nation's primary religion. This flexibility allows your nation to evolve alongside your population, but it comes with both opportunities and risks. Switching between denominations in the same religious group is usually easier. That does make sense. Obviously, they are different, but not crazy different. This also doesn't require much in terms of your population demographics. However, switching to a heathen religion is far more demanding, requiring at least 40% of your population to already follow this new heathen faith that you want to convert to. Of course, conversion at the state level is never painless. Changing your primary religion will sharply reduce national stability. The population you have of your previous faith will be deeply dissatisfied, potentially sparking rebellions or even a civil war. Choosing when and how to make this transition to a new religion is therefore a high-stakes decision that can reshape the future of your empire and your campaign. So you can see an example of this here. Select religion to convert to, select orthodoxy, and 50 stability, which is quite a lot of stability. You can have up to 100 stability, but still 50 is a lot. But maybe you want to do this. You can see here 62% is orthodoxy, so you probably want to convert over to this because then you're going to be picking up all the different benefits, all the different population happiness, things like that. So it probably would be worth doing it in this example they are showing us. Your primary religion also unlocks unique advances that are exclusive to certain religions or religious groups. These advances grant powerful bonuses that can shape your long-term strategy and benefit you as you progress through the game. And then they're going to show us some examples here. So the first one here is available for the Dharmic religious group, and that gives you population growth 0.03. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it does add up over time. And then the second one here is available for the Catholic nations, and this gives you monthly prosperity 0.10%. Again, not a massive modifier, but you'll pick this up, and then that does add up during your campaign. And then if you do change religion, you'll obviously lose these bonuses. So although they're not massive, this might be a factor as to whether you want to change or not. And then as I mentioned earlier, there are some buildings that are religious specific. Some of these come at the start of the game, but other ones are unlocked through advances as you progress through it. Examples of these are the madrasa buildings in the Islamic nations or the Confucian Academy for Buddhist nations. And I'm going to show us these here. So the first one here is the madrasa. You can see max literacy of the clergy plus 5%. I will say most of the religious buildings do have some kind of literacy bonus with them, at least for the most part anyway. Clergy food consumption plus 10%, pop conversion speed plus 10, Tribesmen to peasants plus 10%, which is a very nice bonus to get. Tribesmen, not very useful in this game. You want to try and get them up to peasants as soon as you can, especially if you have somewhere that's a lot of tribesmen in there. And then obviously the second one they talked about, the Confucian Academy, max literacy for burghers plus 10%. As I said, a lot of these have a literacy bonus of some kind. Population promotion speed plus 10, so that's moving people from like peasant to burgher to noble. And then institution growth plus 50%. That's actually a really good one. Confucian Academy, that's going to be great for spreading institutions, especially as some of the Western institutions spread east. This is going to be fantastic for spreading it through your realm, and then maybe you can save some money and some stability when you're trying to embrace that institution, and then you can have that within your realm as well. And with that, guys, that's the end of the religion part of this dev diary. Let me know what you think about it. I think the religious system looks so cool in this game. It's such an improvement from EU4. The different ways it can play out, the different bonuses, buildings, all the things they've covered here. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of any of the religions they've talked about here, nearly all of them have been covered in previous Tinto Talks dev diaries. So go back on the channel and watch those. There's like Shintoism, Catholicism, the Reformation, the folk religions, all these different ones. They've given more in-depth dev diaries, talking about the specific mechanics for them, how they work, how you interact with them. Again, this is just a brief overview. But the next part of the dev diary is all going to be about culture and how that affects your campaigns as well. So in their quest to simulate the most precise living world possible, they've ended up with a lot of details concerning cultures. Obviously, as they've looked into this, researched them, they've got a lot of information, and on a scale never seen before, they've implemented many of these into EU5. There's going to be over 2,000 different cultures in the game. This is the starting culture map for 1337. You can see a bunch of these cultures here. Obviously, there's a whole lot more of them as well. So each culture belongs to a wider culture group, so very similar to how the religion system works. These represent shared traditions or historical connections between the different cultures, giving a bonus to cultural opinion and making accepting cultures within the culture group cheaper in terms of culture capacity. They're going to talk about that later on. Again, many of these features have been talked about in previous dev diaries though. The particularity here is that a culture can belong to multiple culture groups, but if the culture is isolated enough, it may not belong to any culture group either. An example of an isolated culture is the Kurdish culture, not belonging to any other culture groups, while an example of a culture belonging to multiple culture groups is Muscovite, belonging to East Slavic and the Slavic culture group. Each country in the game has a primary culture representing the nation's representative culture. For example, Hungarian is the primary culture of the Kingdom of Hungary, who would have thought? But within the Kingdom of Hungary, there's also a bunch of other cultures as well, the Slovak, Croatian, Serbian, and a bunch more as well I'm not going to try butcher the names of. And then especially as you conquer and expand your territory, you're going to bring more of these cultures into the fold. Very few nations in EU5 are perfectly homogenous. Many of them contain a myriad of secondary culture groups that you can find within their locations. Each of these groups might have different aspirations as your primary culture, and even some become rebellious depending on the level of acceptance and your population satisfaction. And depending on your acceptance level of that culture, the population that follow it may be limited as to what they can do in your realm, so they might not be able to join your armies. They may limit the integration of locations as well, and there's a bunch of other things this can affect. So as we saw with religion, these smaller cultures in your realm can be useful to you, but you can also kind of block them from being useful to you as well. And you can see in the next screenshot the society page once again, but instead of religion, it is culture. It is set up similar to the religion tab though. You can see the primary culture Hungarian, as they were just talking about. The common language is also Hungarian, and then the cultural tradition, cultural influence, the assimilation rate, the accepted cultures, the artists, and the work of art. And for the rest of this dev diary, they're going to cover everything you can see here, and then also around the societal values that are linked to these as well. So below that, you can see the culture breakdown. Well, I guess in the middle, you can see that like a pie chart about the different cultures and how big they are in the realm. And then as you go down this UI, you can see Hungarian at the top, that is the primary culture, and then Slovak, Croatian, Serbian, they are tolerated cultures. And then as I said earlier, you can have some that aren't even tolerated in your realm. But you can see here Hungary trying to bring everyone together, helping the realm at large, and then you've got to deal with those different cultures as well. The next thing they're going to show us is the same UI, but for 1723 as Hungary. So you can see Hungarian for the culture and the language, and then the cultural tradition, cultural influence, assimilation rate. All those stats there have changed. Look at all those works of art, 339 works of art. I hope they've got somewhere good to show those off for their people. And then below that, the breakdown, you can see Hungarian, still the primary, and then Lesser Polish is accepted, and then all the different cultures below that, still tolerated. But if you look back at the previous one, it's a very different makeup here. Obviously, they've played a bunch of years in the game, and it has changed how the culture is in that realm and how it is going to play out as well. So as a player, to avoid malices or basically negative opinions of this, you have two options: tolerate and accept a culture, or to assimilate that culture into your primary culture. And for now, they're going to focus on accepting cultures into your realm. So firstly, before accepting a culture into your country, they must go from being discriminated to being tolerated. In order to tolerate a culture, there must be at least 1% of your population or 1 million population represented in your nation of that culture. And you can see a breakdown here of how this works. So add a new culture as the tolerated culture in our country. If it is a kindred culture, it will not be as costly to maintain, and you can see the requirements here to hit it. To be able to accept a culture into your country, there must first be enough population from that culture. Either that culture must represent 2.5% of your population, or of 1 million population represented in your nation. So the first one was tolerated, and then this one is for accepted. And you can see the breakdown again there, what you need to be able to hit this. Again, this one's showing Hungary and the Serbian population as well. So once you're able to do that, if you're wanting to do so, you can move them up the ladder basically of acceptance in your realm for these different cultures. Both tolerating and accepting a culture comes at the cost of cultural capacity, which we saw in that previous UI. The price of tolerating or accepting a culture in terms of cultural capacity depends on the number of population in the world that follow that culture versus your culture in the world as well. And then also the cultural opinion of your primary culture versus the one you're trying to accept. All these different things factor into how expensive this is going to be for you to do. This means that tolerating and accepting cultures comes at a varied cost depending on these factors and some other ones as well. One culture may cost you 0.15 cultural capacity, whilst another one might cost you 2 cultural capacity to accept. So this is, I think, just to limit you being able to just accept everybody. The smaller ones in your realm, they're going to be easier for you to do. But if you bring in something else, if you're playing as England and you try tolerate like French, it's going to be very hard for you to do, obviously, and this is how it's kind of built into the gameplay of the game as well. Each nation in the game starts with a base of 0 cultural capacity, but these can be increased by many factors. Duchies give you 0.5 capacity, kingdoms give you +1, and empires give you +2. There is also advances in the game. Certain advances will increase your cultural capacity by a flat amount or by a percentage. Most nations will start with a cultural acceptance advance in the Age of Traditions, granting them +1 cultural capacity. So unlike what they said earlier, there's basically going to be nobody that has 0 cultural capacity. You're pretty much going to have at least 1 cultural capacity in the game. It's going to be very hard to get less than that. Laws can either increase or decrease your cultural capacity, depending on which ones you choose. You can, however, go over this limit. However, it does come at the cost of the efficiency of your cabinet and at the growth of your primary culture's influence and tradition. You can see 2 examples of this here. So accepted cultures of Muscovy. Muscovy is using 1.62 out of 2 cultural capacity, and then as you can see, it lists below that the accepted and the tolerated ones. The max cultural capacity is +2. That is because they are a kingdom, and they have that cultural acceptance advance that they talked about earlier. The next example they're going to show is the accepted cultures of Vigenjana. I definitely pronounce that wrong every time. I do apologize. And as you can see, they are a bigger realm. They are an empire, and you can see all the accepted cultures they have, also the tolerated ones as well. But as you can see, there's also a lot of these that are relatively cheap for them as well. As they said, if they're cultures that are close to them, maybe they're not that big either. You can see some of these are like 0.05, 0.15, but some of them are bigger. There's one 0.38, 0.32, 0.48 as well. So these ones are bigger cultures. They're more expensive for you to accept, but that is going to give you the bonuses they talked about earlier. And then as they show at the bottom, their cultural capacity is 7.70. This is in 1652. And they have, as you can see, the Empire rank, a bunch of advances that help them as well, and then allow foreign rituals. That is a policy in the law system, and that is giving them +1 as well. So again, this stacks up over time, depending on what you're trying to do in your campaign. You won't always pick all of these up, but maybe you will. Maybe you've got some research left over after picking up everything that you want in a certain age, so you might want to pick these up anyway at that point if you've got nothing else to do, even if you're not focusing on cultures. So cultural opinion defines the relationship between 2 cultures, and there are 5 levels of cultural opinion. The first one is enemy. This culture sees your culture as a lifetime enemy. They will be heavily dissatisfied and rebellious within your nation. Enemy cultures cannot be tolerated or accepted. They are just enemies for life, basically. Then there is negative. This culture sees your culture negatively. They will also be dissatisfied, but they can be managed if their needs and wants are met. Negative cultures cannot be accepted. Then there's neutral. Obviously, just they're neutral to you. Nothing either way for those ones. Then there's positive. This culture sees your culture positively and is cheaper to tolerate and accept in your nation compared to neutral opinion. And then the last one is kindred. This culture sees your culture as kindred friends. They are much cheaper to tolerate and accept in your nation, so they're so similar to you, they're very easy to bring into your realm. Next, they're going to show us an example of this. This is the Andalusi culture, and you can see they're currently discriminated against in Castile, and you can see the different modifiers this is producing, the language, the culture groups, all the information here that you can see, currently how many population in the world are of this culture, And then I guess you'll decide, do I want to make this a tolerated culture? It's going to cost you 5 prestige in this example. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe ultimately you're going to get rid of them. But who knows? Maybe you want to make them tolerated, and then you can start using them potentially in your army or something like that. So these are going to be the decisions you'll have to take. I think also you can probably mostly ignore this if you just want a chill campaign and not worry about it too much. So to improve the opinions that we just saw, nations have access to a diplomatic action called Ask to Improve Cultural Opinion. This action will improve the primary culture's opinion of your culture by 1 level. In order to be able to do this action, you must have a friendly relation between the 2 nations, have favors available, and not be a rival as well. A loyal subject with a positive opinion will also accept this action outside of those rules. Obviously, if they're a subject of yours, they're not likely to be a rival as well. This makes a great strategy for improving cultural opinion with a subject of a different primary culture before integrating them, to make the integration that much cheaper as well, and also the culture. So yes, you kind of bring them into your fold as a vassal, improve your cultural opinion of them, and then you can integrate them into your realm, and that's cheaper than trying to make that culture better in your realm. So I guess a little bit of a game tip there by the game team. And then you can see an example of that in the next screenshot. Asked to improve culture opinion. This is Novgorod and the Muscovites, and showing you the modifiers here as to whether they'll accept this or not, again, if you want to decide to do this. With the amount of cultures in EU5 and the limit of a nation's cultural capacity, it's not always going to be possible to tolerate and accept every culture in your empire. This is where cultural assimilation comes into play in the game. Just like religious conversion, cultural assimilation is a slow process. Every integrated location that has a majority of either your primary culture or accepted culture will have a base of +2 assimilation to your primary culture every month. However, this does not mean that every integrated location will automatically assimilate. There are other factors that come into play, and they're going to list these out now. So the average literacy of clergy in that location, the buildings like the marketplace, level of control, laws, estate privileges, spiritualism versus humanist, and then your cultural influence as well. So very similar, as I said, to the religion conversion. How you can assimilate people into your primary culture is affected by a bunch of things as well. Very similar to that as well, there is a cabinet action that allows you to assimilate provinces quicker, and you can see that on the screen now. So the monthly assimilation in Constantinople, and you can see the primary culture effect. The base effect for this, as I said, is +2. Average literacy of clerics. Lack of control is -50%. So you want to get that control up as quick as you can. It helps with a bunch of features in the game. And then marketplace, local works of art, humanist, promoting cultural unity, and then integrate foreign traditions as well. And as you can see in this example, integrating people relatively quickly. It is Hungarian cultural influence versus Greek cultural tradition, and how that system works is what they're going to talk about next. So the cultural influence that we just saw there for Hungary is like their attack factor for their culture, and then cultural tradition is kind of like the defensive feature of the other culture, and basically the higher number of the two generally will be a big part of how you can assimilate people easier. So the cultural influence, that is your attack power I just talked about. This can be increased by many things like works of art that they're going to talk about later, prestige, advances, laws, and cultural buildings like libraries. This number has a monthly growth increased by all nations with the primary culture, but also a monthly decay as well. So if you don't kind of invest in it, it will ultimately start going down as well. Cultural influence eventually will plateau to a level until you or another nation with your primary culture increase it further. And then as we just said, cultural influence is opposed by cultural tradition. That is the defensive power in the cultural war. Likewise, this has a monthly change depending on buildings, values, advances. Very similar to influence, it can be modified by a bunch of things as well. The comparison between these two factors, influence and tradition, will define the cultural war between your primary culture, impacting multiple processes like assimilation, integration, spy networks, diplomacy, and even siege ability as well. It does go into the military side in some ways. Having a high cultural influence will help you assimilate faster, and cultures with low cultural tradition will be more susceptible to being assimilated easier. And you can see again the society page here. In this example, the primary culture is Neapolitan, the common language is Italian, with that dialect as well. And this is an example in 1540 as the Two Sicilies. Again, lots of works of art, artists, and then the accepted cultures, all those things they just talked about. Usually you will assimilate a culture into your primary culture to help your country be more unified, but you can technically change a local culture to any culture that is present in your country, allowing you to shape the cultural tapestry of your nation in any way that you want to. Note that some specific cultures are directly tied to their faith, so they will not be allowed to be assimilated unless they've also been converted first. And you can see an example of the cabinet task here, assimilating prelap, and you can see plus 74%, and you can see what it's changing as well. If this cabinet member had better stats that were relevant, this would also increase. Obviously, if he had less stats, he's got 52 in this example out of 100. If it was lower, this would also slow it down as well. But if you are trying to focus in a specific area, you can do this cabinet action to do so. Apart from the opposition between cultures, focusing on cultural influence of your primary culture also allows you to become the cultural hegemon of the world. Activated in the Age of Discovery, the cultural hegemon gives a bonus of 25% increase in cultural tradition gain, and more importantly, the ability to assimilate full areas as a cabinet action instead of provinces. That is a crazy bonus. Being able to do whole areas rather than provinces is a massive change there. That is a really cool thing to pick up if you can do. This allows much faster assimilation in your nation. To become this cultural hegemon, you have to have the highest cultural influence in the world, and obviously if you're at that point, you then can go to other cultures and kind of push them out of the way. I guess that's really what it's kind of showing. You can see an example of this in the screenshot, Kingdom of Hungary, and as they said, that gives cultural tradition plus 25%, forced change of court language option, yes, and then assimilate area versus province, yes as well. So some really nice bonuses if you can pick this up. Just like religion, certain cultures and culture groups have unique advances, unlocking special units, buildings, and laws. One prominent example of this is the Iberian Special Boat Advance, available only to Iberian culture nations such as Portugal and Castile. They cover this in a previous dev diary showing all the different Iberian ships, but this one is the Iberian Galleon. And why is it better? Because it's Iberian. That is the reason. And with that, guys, that's the end of the culture section of this dev diary. Let me know what you think about it. It is very similar to how the religion system works. You can see the same kind of building blocks in the two systems. You can convert people. You can assimilate people into your realm. All these different ways you can do it. And as they said, you can either tolerate them or you can go against them, try push them out, or you can bring everyone into your nation and use the bonuses from there as well. So again, all these different ways you can play the same country in different ways, depending on what you're trying to do. And I think from everything we've seen from EU5, that's one of the biggest things in this game, is that you can play the same nation multiple times, which I know a lot of people did in EU4, but there's so many different ways, I think, in this that you can play a country out, even more so than EU4. And even just in this one dev diary, we've seen two different systems and how they could change how you play a nation. The next part of the dev diary is going to be on spiritualist versus humanist values. This is part of the societal value system. Last week's was about like inward and outward exploration and how your nation saw itself. This one, again, is about spiritualist versus humanist. So as we've discussed in this dev diary around religion and culture in the game, they want to highlight the core ideological tension that runs through every nation, humanist versus spiritualist. These two opposing outlooks shape your society, your faith, culture, and identity. A spiritualist nation grounds its identity in its primary religion. The clergy play a central role. The religion becomes interwoven with the fabric of the state. This approach comes with faster conversion to your primary religion at the cost of assimilation to your primary culture. And then humanist, this is pretty much the opposite of that. They're moving away from their primary religion being the cornerstone of their nation. Instead, it embraces tolerance, allowing heretics and heathens to coexist more freely. This also increases cultural assimilation, but at the cost of conversion to your primary religion. So again, these two different ways you can take your realm. Is it going to be very spiritual, or is it going to be more around culture and different bonuses? Again, depending on what you're trying to do in your campaigns, we'll kind of choose which way this goes. And again, some realms have events and things like that that will push you naturally in one way or the other, but you can just negate that and do whatever you want as well. Do you want to weave religion into the heart of your nation, ensuring unity through faith, or do you foster a broader, more inclusive society that grows stronger through cultural integration? And they're going to show us here the tooltips for both of these. I'll put them on the screen next to each other. So spiritualist, when spiritualist is dominant, this will scale up to, so again, these are the maximums. It will scale depending on how far along this bar you are. So at maximum, it is possible clerics in towns and cities plus 20, pop conversion speed plus 50%, but population assimilation speed minus 50%. As they said, it does kind of inversely affect each other. Antagonism, religious influence plus 50%, tolerance of the true faith plus 2, and then the other side of this, humanist, population conversion speed minus 50%, population assimilation speed plus 50%, antagonism, religious influence minus 50%, and then tolerance of heretics and heathens plus 1 as well. So again, as they discuss, basically the opposite of each other for the most part, depending on what you're trying to do in your realm. And with that, guys, that's the end of that section. Next, they're going to talk about languages. So tied closely to culture is the language system. Every culture is associated with a language, the most common vernacular spoken by its people. This isn't just immersion through character names, it also determines how cultural tradition and cultural influence are built up over time, estate satisfaction, and your research speed as well. And you can see an example of this here. This is the French language. It is part of the Romance language group, and it also has 16.34 power. You can see the different dialects here, and then below that you can see the French language is used by a bunch of cultures, obviously Norman, Picard, all these different ones, primarily found in France. And then below that you can see the population in each country and how many people speak it, obviously French being the biggest, then Normandy, Brittany, all these different vassals that they have at the start of the game, and then ultimately they'll probably get brought into France. And then the French number obviously gets bigger as well. The French language is the market language of the Paris market, so even the trade side of this game is affected by language as well. So at the heart of the system is language power, a measure of how influential language is on the world stage. Language power is increased by how much it is used in the world and at what level. So in each nation there are 4 different languages used: your court language, the official tongue of the administration, and high politics. The more politically powerful the nation using the court language is, the more powerful the language becomes. Then you have the common language, the everyday speech of the population throughout your nation, depending on your primary culture. The more cultural influence of cultures using this language, and the more trade capacity of nations that have this language as their common language, the more powerful the language becomes as well. Then you have the market language. As I was saying, this is related to trade and commerce. The market language is determined by the common language used at the market center. The total trade advantage of the markets using this will also affect how powerful the language becomes. And then the last one is the liturgical language, the language of religion, worship, and ceremonies. The more clergy population using this language, again, the more powerful the language becomes. So if you're really trying to focus on this, you want to get as many of these different factors following your language and make them as powerful as you can as well. The language of all 4 of these can be the same throughout your nation, but that is not always the case. For example, England at the start of the game uses French due to obviously the Norman invasion as their court language. English is the common language. English is the market language due to the London market, and then Latin is their religious language, whilst the Mamluk Sultanate uses Arabic for everything. So really showing us there the 2 examples of that. But next they're going to show us a screenshot of this. As I said, this is the English kingdom, but you can see there the court language is French in this example, but you can change that if you want to do so. It does cost you 20 stability at the moment to change the court language of your realm. And then how else can languages affect your realm? So estates have their own agenda regarding languages. Nobles want a powerful language as a court language to increase their own prestige, increasing their satisfaction the more powerful the language is. The clergy want the religious language to be the court language to increase the cultural influence in the nation. Commoners want the common language, obviously, to be the court language to increase their ability to take part in the court as well. Language power comes into play with research speed, with more powerful languages gaining flat bonuses with their research ability. However, these languages cannot always be changed. For example, Islam is always locked to Arabic and Catholicism is always locked to Latin. Technically, Mandarin is the strongest language in 1337, but no religion uses it as their language at game start. This means that Latin is the strongest liturgical language. I do apologize, I butcher that word every time I try. At the start of the game, with Arabic a close second, but after the Protestant Reformation, this won't always be the case. Obviously, the Reformation breaks that down a little bit as the church splits into 2. And then you can see an example of this, monthly research in Naples. Monthly research is 1.39, that's because it is a settled country. You can see the power of the language is 0.07. The average literacy of the realm, the number of embraced institutions, and then the clergy estate satisfaction as well. And this is showing Latin as the primary language for this in 1337. And then the very last bit of this dev diary, I know I've kept you for a long time, so do hit that like button if you've enjoyed today's video. Do subscribe if you haven't already, but let's get into the final bit. So this is talking about works of art in your realm. So within your population, certain illustrious individuals can rise above the rest. These are painters, writers, architects, philosophers, storytellers and more, whose works will leave a lasting impact on history. When any of these figures produce a work of art, it contributes directly to your nation's primary culture's cultural influence and also boosts your prestige. The total number of great works a nation can possess also strengthens its cultural tradition, reinforcing your people's identity and pride over time. And you can see an example of this here. This is the works of art tab. You can see the artistic skill is 18.82. The artist's salary is worse by 2%. That doesn't really matter too much, I don't suppose. And then below that again, showing off these works of art and how they affect you as well. And these are works of art in the two Sicilies in 1540. And they've got a whole bunch of these affecting their culture and then also their prestige. This is actually a really good way to get prestige in the game without having to do a great deal to actually get it. The quality of these works of art will depend on the artistic skill of your nation, which is impacted by your average literacy and your prestige. You can increase your cultural investment directly, increasing your prestige and artistic skill. This is managed in your budget. You have a sliding scale. You can invest more money if you wish to, and this directly helps your artists. But these artists are also very competent on their own, especially if they are historical artists like Michelangelo or Shakespeare, and you will get events in the game where these historical people come to your court and you can decide if you want to fund them or not. If you don't do so, they can go to other courts, I believe, as well. So in this example, you can see the artists of the Two Sicilies. They're very focused on the Two Sicilies in this dev diary. I do kind of like that. So they can support 3 artists, and they currently have 4 in the country. The sources are Kingdom Rank, Patron of the Arts, and the Right to Rule advances as well. And these are the artists in the realm. You can see what they look like, and then you can also see what they're doing as well. So you can see when one of these might be finished as you go through your campaign. A work of art can have 8 levels of quality: local known, locally well known in area, renowned in area, regionally well known, regionally renowned, masterpiece, and then finally magnum opus for the very best one. The higher the level of the work of art, the higher the cultural influence and the prestige gained from that item. Making art is not just decorative, it is a strategic asset. A patron of the arts can find their cultural influence eclipsing local neighbors, whereas if you neglect this, over time your culture could be overshadowed by more vibrant civilizations. When a work of art is completed, it is present in the location in which it was made. Some works of art are movable, but others, such as a building, cannot be moved. Obviously, that does make sense. In this example, the Pyramids of Giza, obviously you can't move these. These are a magnum opus. And then the artist who made this, we don't know who made this. Unknown creator. Was it a person? Was it aliens? We'll never know, will we? And then on top of this, as we've seen with other things, other systems in the game do kind of intertwine into it. So during warfare, you can steal works of art, or you can even destroy them as well, either through sieging armies or through being conquered. You are going to have to take that into account. If you're trying not to do warfare, if somebody does come and attack you, they could destroy a bunch of these or steal them, and then you're going to be kind of set back a bit in your endeavors. But anyway, folks, that's the end of the dev diary this week. I've kept you for a long time. This has covered religions and cultures in the game, and then also those other factors that kind of tie into it as well. So do let me know what you think about all this. I think this is such an improvement on EU4, how this is going to work, how it works into all those systems. I know I keep saying that in these dev diaries. I do apologize if you find it a little bit repetitive, but I do want to emphasize that because everything in this game is so linked together. You can't really ignore something entirely like you can do, but that will affect your campaigns. So as I've shown in this and all the previous dev diaries as well, you really have to take this into account as you play through this. But again, let me know what you think about all these different systems they've talked about today. They do say next week, for all you guys who like map painting, they're going to cover military and warfare and how that plays out in the game as well. So that's going to be a very cool dev diary, probably longer than this dev diary has been. So obviously, if you have enjoyed this, yes, this is a segue. Do make sure to hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I've covered all the dev diaries. As I've said all the way through this, the Tinto flavor, the Tinto talks, and the previous dev diaries have covered pretty much every feature of this game, how they play out, going into the different kind of subsections of it, and how you can interact with them as well. So if you are interested in this game, if this is the first video you've watched, do go back and watch the previous videos on my channel. I know I have a lot of them, but you can cherry pick the ones you might find the most interesting. And then on top of that, I also cover Crusader Kings 3 in a very similar manner on the channel. We are building up to All Under Heaven, which is bringing China, Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, a bunch of mechanics, the Silk Road, as I'm going to be talking about tomorrow in a dev diary. So if you are interested in Crusader Kings, do follow along on the channel as well. I'm always talking about both of these games. I also live stream twice a week as well. So do drop by if you've got questions, if you want to ask about these games. We always have a pretty chill chat and we just talk about things and play the games, do achievement runs and things like that. So do drop by if you can. But we'll leave it there for today and I'll see you all next time.